When I met Santosh and was learning more about the Stitch approach, I saw solutions coming to be much faster than I'd ever seen them. And I saw them coming together in a way that didn't require a replacement of something that people were already using. And that for me was kind of the initial intrigue in that, wow, I'm actually seeing some things, move here that otherwise would require months and months of change inside of an organization. And then when it really kind of catapulted from there is when I saw him be able to kind of connect those to things that would typically be cross-functional. So it's one thing to be able to affect change kind of in the underwriting universe, but that typically then has constraints on how we display things, quoting or whatever it might be. Well, his ability to help an organization connect those things or stitch them, right, was where I really started to get excited about the prospect of spending more time with a company who could actually create solutions and solve problems and not just be a part of talking about them. Stitch kind of straddles the divide between those two things is what I've seen is, they're not the rigid SaaS application that takes months, if not years, and 7 figures plus to install. They can be started in kind of a minor way or in a much broader roadmap type fashion. And all of that allows a client to start small or start big, but not be constrained in the future by them being a point solution. And I think that's a very unique approach and one that's very timely. I think that the most interesting thing that I've heard is that, it is not uncommon for us to get a fresh conversation with an organization where their attitude is sort of, hey, I'm interested to learn more about this, but just so you know, we have a roadmap, we have an AI czar, we have, any number of these types of things already in here. So we'll take a look, but we're kind of doing our thing. And by the end of the conversation, what they've seen is the ability to make Stitch their own, to make this be something that is malleable to what they're doing. We're able to typically look under the hood and say, you're thinking of starting from scratch isn't as cost effective or efficiency effective as using a tool like this. On the other side of it, you might find organizations who really are looking for a vendor, but they think that this is going to be something where they have to adopt 15 agents and do a transformation, right? They think it's going to be a SaaS situation that they've heard across the industry for the last decade or so. And what we're typically able to do is say, no, let's focus on one area. What is one area that's costing you time? It's costing you money. That's a pain point. Let's look at it. Let's develop a proof of concept and let's go work on that over the next 60 days. And once you see that solution, you can decide where to go from there. And again, people are pretty quick at that point to say, yeah, let's do it. And from there, it's usually an easy decision to onboard. But the best part about it is it usually leads to more conversations after that once they've felt that experience. So those are two ends of the spectrum in terms of carriers and what they're looking for. And Stitch is meeting both. But then the next great thing about it is the company itself who adopts this can interject their own context into it. And that's what the POC phase and the benefit sprints allow us to do, is bring all those things together. So now you have AI efficiency, but with the context of the industry you play in, as well as context of the organization itself. In the group market, the voluntary industry is extremely exciting, but it's very dynamic. Not only do you have a lot of change going on inside the insurance companies themselves, driven from this desire to create much better customer experience. And let's remember, there's 3 different customers. At a minimum, there's 3 different customers. You have employees, employers, and brokers that carriers have to navigate. And Stitch's solutions are really crossing over all of those. So we have a variety of elements that are helping on the claims side of things, a variety of elements that are helping on the underwriting side of things that are going to help the broker and the carrier interact, a variety of things that are happening just on data exchange and census ingestion and things like that are going to really help that front end piece of the equation to fuel underwriting and then ultimately billing. So you have all of these things going on in the industry, and Stitch is trying to meet those again in a way that really does create more of a customized orchestration rather than a modular drop-in. right? And I can't tell you how many times I've worked with a company and asked a question about, do they have a solution for X, Y, and Z? And what they say is, oh, that's coming in ABC vendors 2.4 drop 6 months from now, right? And what the conversation has been with Stitch is, what do you need? And let's write that into the existing agent that you're already using. And then what that actually does is create what the guys typically are calling micro agents, right? It creates this now derivative sliver that can be used in other organizations. And then we've even seen them used in other channels. So all this development isn't creating so much one-offs, it's creating this really wide library of solutions that just create, more and more speed, and I think are leading to Stitch feeling more and more like a true tool that people can use to organize their business across different functional areas rather than just a point solution or a vendor. When I think of this idea of the last mile, it typically stems from an organization bringing in new technology in the last decade or even the last couple of years. And that technology usually falls under this heading of transformation, and is usually a technology that can wildly change so many things. It can change the databasing, it can change so many different pieces. The typical challenge, though, is that every organization is so different. Their workflows, their internal processes, the specific hookups that they have, the numbers of systems, and the way all that is brought together means that as I drop in this larger SaaS technology or transformative type technology, I usually have these kind of gaps or, parts of the process that are sort of viewed as, okay, well, we just changed 80% of it or 90% of it. This last 10 we can do manually. And unfortunately, over time, organizations have so many of these that you look across them. A lot of times that's what a lot of people's jobs are. It's just managing these different things rather than managing the actual end situation. And a perfect example for this I like to use because most people can relate to it is something like claims. So if you look at the claims process in a typical voluntary situation, a carrier might first have to kind of triage the claim that comes in. I have to look at that claim. I have to understand, is it ready to be evaluated? Do I have the data that I need? Is it complete? Is it legible if it was handwritten and sent in some way? So you have that triaging piece. Well, as we've gotten under the hood, me as a consultant in the last decade, and looked at that process, it's usually one that the length of time is dictated by the fact that it takes so long for people to get through that process. It's not usually the analysis per se. And so if you look at all those little pieces and you add up the things that have to happen, that's a perfect application for something like Stitch. You have some areas that really are just automation, but then you also have some that are context that they need. It needs to sit on the backbone of some automation that has some, awareness and context for that industry. So as we've looked at the claims triaging process that sometimes can take 48, 72 hours in some companies, we can sync that down to a matter of minutes, really in real-time process on the front end of a portal with a carrier interacting with an employee. And so if you think about it in that terms, you've now just taken out so much of the bloat in the insurance experience. And again, any hands that we're touching that process now can be a part of the customer service experience, can be a part of the claims analysis experience. So that moves them along faster in their career. And that also gets the customer a much better experience for working with that company. And if you take that and you drop that across all the different points of customer experience in a company, that's where you can really have extensive, change.